Tibor Gergely is known for his illustrations of little golden books including Scuffy the Tugboat, Tootle the Train, and The Taxi That Hurried. He's also my step-great-grandfather. My dad was close with Gergely. You can't see it, but one of these letters is addressed to him. I called him up to ask him about Gergely. This is a story about Gergely's wonderful illustrations for the little golden books, but it's also a story about Hungarian history, and about my own family's history.
Well, it claims that the call is being recorded.
That's excellent. All right, good.
That is great.
Tibor Gergely was born in 1900. He received his art training in Budapest, and by his late teens he began visiting a salon of artists and intellectuals known as the Sunday Circle.
The story begins in Vienna. It's a very lively time around the turn of the century in Vienna. Sunday Circle, which was a kind of a salon, in effect, was organized around the person of George Lukács, another very close family friend, who was the great Marxist political philosopher and literary critic. Who other people in the Sunday Circle, Bartók, the composer, was in the Sunday Circle for a while. And then, of course, in addition, your great-grandmother, Anna Lesnai, essayist, poet, feminist, and, of course, artist.
In 1918, Lesnai divorced my great-grandfather, politician Oscar Jaszi.
Oscar Jaszi was a difficult, remote, important person. She had a number of lovers. He, of course, had affairs, actresses, at least one illegitimate child.
For Gergely and my great-grandmother, Anna Lesnai, it was a case of opposites attracting.
She was a big, frankly, fat woman with an outsized personality and an extremely sort of strong and aggressive way of self-presentation. And he was physically very small, almost pixie-ish. He was one of those people who always seems to be looking for the joke, for the humor in anything.
Lesnai was on good terms with the communists at that point, who took over power in Hungary shortly after the liberal revolution of 1918. So she and Gergely stayed in Budapest for the time being, living at least in part on the generosity of her rich beet farmer relatives, the Hopvanis. In 1919, when there was a right-wing counter-revolution, they left Hungary, dividing their time for the next decade between Vienna and eastern Slovakia, where Lesnai's country estate was located. In this period, Gergely founded a puppet theater, worked as a newspaper cartoonist, while also doing drawings and watercolors of peasant life in the countryside.
Anna Lesnai and Gergely sort of formed this strong bond. During the summers they spent on her estate, where they were basically engaged, as far as I can tell, in spending the hot buddies' money. All of very strange, kind of raffish, bohemian kind of existence, with contacts in the upper classes, and obviously many contacts in the artistic world.
Over and over, my great-grandmother's house appears in his books. The house was the lost place, the place to which Gergely could never return. Around 1930, they moved their city residence back to Budapest, but the political climate there was continuing to deteriorate. Anti-Jewish legislation began to be passed in 1937 and 1938. Lesnai and Gergely left for New York in 1939. They lived on Lower Lexington Avenue and spent their summers in Massachusetts. Gergely immediately set about finding work. In 1940, Gergely illustrated his first children's books, Topsy-Turvy Circus and The Merry Shipwreck. In 1942, he began working for Little Golden Books, a new division of Simon & Schuster, whose goal was to make high-quality books for children that would cost just 25 cents. He went on to illustrate more than 70 Little Golden Books. From the day he arrived, the city was a source of inspiration for Gergely.
He was fascinated by the two sides of human existence. He was drawn to the city and to machines and to all of the complicated systems and the busy human lives that they produced, and at the same time he was obviously drawn to the pastoral and the bucolic. And it's absolutely clear to me that New York was in some ways really, really important to him, that the romance of the big city had a great pull for him. But then on the other hand, he was also obviously drawn to the country and the farm and the barnyard and so on and so forth. So there's a kind of polar tension, I think, in his work. And he renders both of those things very, very effectively.
Gergely also loved to draw animals.
He spent a lot of time really trying to figure out what were the salient characteristics, the iconic characteristics of animals. There's obviously a kind of freedom and fluidity and fancy to his work when he settles down to do a more or less realistic drawing of an animal. There really is there's no one better as far as I can see. And one of the triumphs of the books is that they not only show people and animals in posed positions, but that they render movement extremely successfully. So all of that, I think, you could say, goes back to the fact that he was trained as an an artist first and an illustrator second.
One of Gergely's most personal and most artistically ambitious works is not A Little Golden Book at all. Wheel in the Chimney is the story of two storks that build their nest on the wheel that a Hungarian farmer has tied to his chimney. In the fall, they migrate to Africa. Then in spring, they fly home, build new nests, and start again. For Wheel in the Chimney, Gergely collaborated with Margaret Wise Brown, the very successful author of Goodnight Moon. They'd already done a number of books together, including The Seven Little Postmen.
It's clearly a Margaret Wise Brown book in which she is assisting him in telling his story.
I asked my dad one last question.
And do you think that he was interested in children, specifically?
I think that he was in many ways a childlike person. I think that the sort of the impishness, the search for humor in everything around him, the lightness of his emotional touch were all things that suggested to me not arrested development, but someone who had maintained into his adult life and I think this is true of many artists, successful artists, some of the freshness of perception that we associate with children.